program in which we interview people who are practiced in Zen, sometimes not, usually. And it's meant to explore and expose uh, what it is about Zen that has people come to practice Zen, and then what it is that keeps them coming back. So tonight's special guest, Sophia Gallagher, has probably a lot to say about that. I just wanted to mention again, go to www.ascc.org to check out our local programs in Atlanta and to join us in our meditation uh, sessions. And with that, just a brief introduction. Would you please just kind of tell our audience a little bit about your uh, background, what you do, your interest, and we know you're moving to California, so you can fill them in a little bit on that if you like, and then we'll move from there on to the Zen-related issues. I think it's important that people hear what different people do. Uh, you can tell them how old you are if you like. I think it's age and gender diversity. All of those issues are very important to the propagation of Zen, the assimilation of Zen practice into America. So can we just start that general?
Sure, sure. My name is Sophia. Again, I'm 27 years old. I've been in Atlanta on and off since 2010. I'm originally from New York. My rather varied interests all kind of revolve around systems change. So, how to create more just and equitable and sustainable systems from the bottom up, starting with the people and starting with uh, principles around participatory decision making and fair distribution of energy,
Mhm.
and how we can create those systems within the current system to get our basic needs met with each other.
Mhm.
And so that spans around alternative economics. It spans how social systems can function like living adaptive systems. It spans how we do decision making as a group in a way that's non coercive. It covers alternative distributed technologies and how we do communication in a way that's cooperative and fair and ethical, how we
Mhm.
manage our information, how we do education. And so
It's a narrow niche.
yeah, and it's every aspect of what it means to be a civilization,
Mhm.
but coming at it through a
Mhm.
lens of what is ethical and what is fair, and how we
Mhm.
create that with each other and not depend on others to create that for us.
Very timely and needed.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your experimentation around that here in Atlanta. You had a library, you had
Yeah.
different kinds of organizations you put together. Tell us a little bit about how that worked for
So I founded an organization that runs as a nonprofit cooperative called the Library of the Commons, and it's a information resource hub and a learning community that's rooted in these ideas of systems change. And how do we exchange information and knowledge and skills in a way that creates a informed foundation for starting these
you.
alternative
Mhm.
systems and practicing participatory decision making in that
Mhm.
process.
So tell us a little bit about how that worked. What makes you call it a library, for
Well, we
instance?
have books.
You have books.
Yeah, we
Okay.
do. For one thing, we have a book collection that is modest but really strong. It's about 250 curated books.
Mhm.
We're forming digital collections of articles and journal entries and different online
Mhm.
resources.
And what's the thread running through the
the
collection?
The thread is alternative systems. So all different kinds of understanding labor organizing,
Mhm.
understanding alternative economic systems, alternative education systems, feminist
Mhm.
studies, the history of radical studies, the history of racial justice
Mhm.
efforts.
And what makes you feel? I know you're very dedicated to this. What makes you feel it's important now at this time?
Well, we're in an impasse, where we're facing the most extreme challenges that humanity has ever faced, and there's no way that we're going to combat the collapse of our biological and ecological systems as well as our economic and political systems if we don't learn to collaborate at scale. And we can't collaborate at scale if we're not informed.
Mhm.
And so being able to trade information and transform our understanding of the world together is imperative
Mhm.
in trying to face those challenges.
And what are some of those threats that you see? Are they the typical things that we see on the news,
Increasingly,
climate
yeah,
change and so on?
yeah, extreme weather events. So
Mhm.
the cyclone in Mozambique that displaced 600,000 people, the
Mhm.
floods in the Midwest that took out a lot of our agricultural infrastructure.
Right.
Those are all within the last couple of months. The fires in Northern California, like all of these are connected in a way that are
Mhm.
going to be increasing over time. And
Mhm.
so, how we deal with that, how we get our basic needs met in a way that's adaptive to our extremely changing and shifting infrastructure
Mhm.
is important.
So I assume digital media is a part of that picture. How do you see that fitting into it?
Well, in communication, if you mean by media information resources, if you mean storytelling,
Mhm. Well, for instance, it used to be before we had cell phones, so forth. Um, we couldn't really get our information from each other.
mm-hmm,
We had to rely on corporate sources for
mm-hmm,
information that are sponsored by uh, vested interests, you might say.
mm-hmm.
So you're reliant on those sort of corporate public media for information. Nowadays, we can communicate with each other,
Right,
and
right.
so it's probably been a radical change that we have still have to no idea what it really means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so not only having that information coordination among the people in terms of being able to say, this is what I'm seeing right now, this is what's going on
Mhm.
here, but also to be able to create our own supply chains. How
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
exchange food, how we exchange basic resources, building materials, all of those becomes more important to be able to have that information and trade it among ourselves,
Mhm.
so we're not reliant on these very bureaucratic organizations that aren't adaptable enough to deal with these circumstances that we're facing. And so another aspect of my work, separate from the Library of the Commons, is a software startup called Sense Compass, and a software called the Knowledge Ecology Interface, as a way to organize the information that we have in our communities
Mhm.
and be able to create an interface of the information that's extremely imperative to you and your network so that you can adapt to change together.
Mhm. Yeah, it's probably before your time, but are you aware of the Whole Earth Catalog, those kind of
I've
movements
heard
back
of
in
it.
the
I think we've
60s?
talked about it before. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's similar, but at a different scale. Yeah.
not only that, but you were dependent on print media even to
Mm-hmm.
communicate. And
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, much more fluid and flexible than that. Also, Ivan Illich, you ever hear of him?
A bit, yeah.
Yeah, I attended I gave classes at his place one year, and he was very much into, he had wrote papers on the right to not work, the right to be able to live, you know,
Yeah.
those kind of things.
I mean, that's pressing in these times with the rise of automation and AI. At
Yeah.
one hand is this frightening thing because how are we going to
Mhm.
get jobs? But on another hand, it should really, if we owned those machines cooperatively, and that
Yeah,
technology
yeah,
cooperatively, we
yeah.
should be able to work less. So it really comes down to the ownership
Mhm.
of those things.
It does. And Buckminster Fuller was a mentor of mine. He was very much into this. He pointed out maybe 50 years ago, that we were not going to be valuable as workers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We will be valuable as consumers, as markets.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea was that he was radical beyond liberal or progressive, whatever we call it these days. And his notion was very much the assured, what's the income called? Assured national income or annual income.
Gross
You know what I mean?
domestic
I don't know what
income.
the
Yeah.
phrase is that they
Yeah.
use, but he said just give everybody enough money to live.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, people sit on the couch and stuff, but after a while they get bored and they'll do something important. So is that kind of the direction that the thrust is going with you?
So it depends. I have a slight critique of this. In the discourse, it's called universal basic income,
Yes, yes.
but one thing that's often overlooked is the amount of power it gives to corporations like Facebook and people who are making completely unfathomable amounts of profits. And they're able to then hold those resources and distribute it, and we're still just indebted to them. And so there's an alternative framework called universal basic assets that really helps the people be able to have responsibility and stewardship over the means through which we're able to get our basic needs met. And so I think universal basic assets gets that conversation going against seeing this intense individualism, and it's you're able to see the way that the system influences the individual circumstances, but it doesn't really get at the power dynamics that underlie that disparity.
So if the income, universal basic income, comes from the same sources, then you're still dependent upon
Exactly.
those corporate sources.
Yeah.
But how do the assets come from somewhere else?
It depends on how they're distributed. So, or what you define by universal basic assets. Most people define them as just like the basic things that we need to survive. So shelter, water, food, and those can be done with things like community supported agriculture, cooperatively owned producer markets. With land, it could be done with land trusts. It could be done with redistribution of huge swaths of lands that are owned by only a few people. And so that way it's stewarded by the community, and they're able to have regenerative enterprises using that land.
Well, I wish you luck on that. Is the going to California, is the new your new profession or your activity there going to be related to this same set of principles?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll still be working on them. I think I'm probably going to do a little bit more hermit lifestyle and doing more research on my own. But after coming out of that kind of deep dive into research and hermit practice, I'm hoping for that still to apply. And the organization, the Library of the Commons, there's a team keeping that alive here. And continuing to host events called Convergence on the solstice and equinoxes.
I assume you'll stay in touch.
Yeah.
So you mentioned hermit, and that's one of our categories in Zen practice, meditation practice. So take us back to, I think you and I first meet in the Great Vow Monastery, or did we meet here and then meet there?
We met here, but I don't think I was there when you were there. I think we talked about it a little bit afterwards, but yeah. I did train there for some time. I was
trying to retrace things. So tell us, take us back to when you first started practicing, getting involved in Zen. Tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life then, and what attracted you to Zen.
So around that time, I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, and I was really, really into philosophy. I studied a particular tradition in philosophy called hermeneutics, which is about how we create structures through which to interpret the world, and how those frameworks are developed in communication with others. And so just that process of interpretation. And towards the end of that degree, I really found myself in an inescapable relativism. Everywhere I turned in terms of ethics or metaphysics or language, just really ended in this relativism that I couldn't escape, and there wasn't any way for me to ground myself in philosophy. And I found that a lot of what I was doing in terms of seeking these answers through my conceptual mind were in a lot of ways leading me astray from the root of those answers. And so I decided when I graduated to join the summer program at Great Vow Zen Monastery out in Oregon with Hogen Roshi and Chosen Roshi, that co-abbots. And I trained there for 6 weeks and then ultimately went back for about 6 months as a way to explore these questions, these fundamental questions of what the nature of being, what the nature of consciousness is, what the nature of being with each other is. And I found through practice that was a better route. I felt exacerbated by
through Zen practice with a community.
With a community.
Or within a community.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the intensity of practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, for the layperson, the person who's not trained in philosophy, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about relativism
Yeah.
in for an 11-year-old.
I can
When,
try. It's been about 5 years now.
but from a personal level, you felt caught up in relativistic judgments or something of
Yeah,
that kind.
it seemed so. Relativism is a way of understanding what's real through an assumption or an understanding that things are relative. And so high, the meaning of the word high is relative to our understanding or the meaning of the word low.
Okay.
Dark to light, good to bad.
Basic dualistic dyads.
Yeah, or even just gradients, and that all of our understanding of pretty much everything comes through a structure of language that we developed in a somewhat arbitrary way, and that we developed through whatever culture we evolved in,
So
whatever
when you
family.
say you felt tangled up in that, you were just sort of running
Yeah,
around in circles within.
yeah, and that there wasn't a real grounding in truth. When you come to an understanding that the truth that our understanding of truth is relative, because it can only be through language, and language itself is relative and derived from our
Right,
culture and our community,
right.
then you're unable to find absolute truth.
So what happened that helped you move away from that or get out of that loop?
Well, I think I started listening to a lot of Alan Watts, and he really brought out the separation between relative truth and absolute truth, and how that was a core foundation of Zen philosophy. I mean, we chant the identity of the absolute and the relative,
Right.
Most mornings, and being able to understand that difference and understand that I was only ever going to be able to get at relative truth through philosophy and through concepts. And the only way to access absolute truth was through practice, was through silence and stillness,
meditation,
because absolute truth can't be understood in linguistic terms. It can only be understood through pure experience.
One of the things you said to me that I remember, you had been at Great Bow, and I don't know if it was in Dokusan or what, but you said, when I go there for so many weeks or months, I leave everything else behind and I go there and do this. And then when I leave there, I go back to this. Right? And you remarked that it looked like what we were trying to do was not have that separation, that your practice in your daily life could somehow be more cohesive for integrated whole. And so you were interested in pursuing that. Now you're talking about becoming a hermit. So I kind of wonder how that all fits together.
Yeah. So, I did all this training at the monastery. It was profoundly life changing, really saved me a couple of times. I'm grateful for it. But whenever I leave the monastic environment where we meditate for 4 hours a day on a normal day and 8 hours a day for many days a month, I found there to be a separation where I was this really ascetic Zen practitioner at the monastery, and then I was like a normal 25-year-old out in the world. And I found that what was beautiful about lay practice, especially in a community like we have here at the Zen Center, is that you're able to integrate it a little bit more, and that you're able to have the intensity of practice that you get at the monastery. You're able to have the sangha or community that you need to have that intensity of practice or maintain it. And yet I can still do my work. I could still do social justice work, and I can still work all day. I'm not completely isolated. And so I had really been looking for that integration while maintaining an intensity of practice. And now
So what makes you want to go into a hermitage type of experience at this point of your development?
So I lived here at the Zen Center for a few months, a year or two ago, and really found that helpful path towards integration. And ever since then, I went full force into founding the library and to going and meeting people who work in anchoring these new visions of a new system all over the world, and do a lot of network weaving and social organizing and educating. And I've found that you can really burn yourself out doing that, and you could really put your whole self into being in service to others without really and then losing sight of your care for your own self and your care for your own practice and really rooting in a sense of integrity before you do all this work in the world.
So that's
And
what attracts you to the idea of hermitage then?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so intensive, self-intensive.
Yeah,
Yes,
of needing to separate myself from my social networks in order to be in service to those social networks. I think that there needs to be a rhythm.
So you lost some distance
Yeah,
between you and that.
yeah, and I think being able to, you know, understand my relationship to the land is a huge piece of it. I think any kind of organizing that's separate from a relationship to the land is bound to fail. And my
Well, I'm a little curious about the practical side of this. How are you pulling this off?
yeah, well, I
I mean,
mean,
everybody would want to be a hermit if they could, I
it's true,
think.
it's true.
More and more these days.
Well, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of intentional communities and eco-villages that exist in rural areas.
So you're joining one of them?
Yeah, there's one. There's about 40 acres. It's called Spirit Song Community.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of these places, they're looking for people to help them. They're looking for people to keep up the infrastructure, to help with the farming.
So there's plenty to do, and
there is, yeah,
they'll support you.
Yeah, and for other people who are interested, I mean, if you go to the IC.org, which is the Fellowship for Intentional Communities directory, you'll find tons of communities that are looking for young people. And so I think that the issue is to be able to be economically sustainable, and I'm fortunate enough to have remote work through my network and system mapping work. So.
Back in the 60s, we weren't as sophisticated, and people called those communes. And Taos, New Mexico was one, many of them. And some of them did pretty well, and some of them did not do so well.
Yeah.
But I think your generation is maybe a little more intelligent, and you have learned a lot from the mistakes of others.
I wish that the mistakes of others were a little bit better documented for us to
Well, that was that was the reason there were a lot of mistakes. There wasn't any documentation either, I think.
Yeah, and we also have the advantage of technology now.
Yeah.
Being able to utilize, like, I'm only able to live there and support myself because I have technology.
Right. And you're going to be doing some work for.
Right. So this
online.
I do network and system mapping is a skill that I'm developing of being able to visualize information about a network of people and what they do, what they have, how to coordinate better. So that's what I'll be doing.
Good. So before we ask for questions from the audience, what have we not talked about? Is there anything in your personal life or anything in your Zen practice experience that you would like to mention?
Sure.
That you think is important for the people to hear?
The thing that maybe just came to me is what role does Zen practice play in the increasing instability of our civilizational systems?
This is an interest of yours?
This is an interest of mine, yeah.
How would you profile it for somebody who doesn't know much about Zen practice?
Yeah, so Zen practice in general is a way to be very responsive and present with anything that arises. And so to not be attached to your expectations about what's going to happen, but instead be present within yourself and adaptive and responsive to what arises with a deep care and concern and presence. And that's relevant in a time when, there's increasing scarcity of food and water, when there's increasing political instability, when there's increasing economic instability, and to be able to sit in the transitions like that, to be able to sit comfortably in increasing uncertainty of our future, uncertainty of our society, is a gift. And I think that Zen practice gets us there.
What would you say to the people who push back on that and say, well, you're just postponing the inevitable. You're just wasting your time. Instead of taking care of business and doing something about things, you're navel gazing. You're sitting
Yeah.
How would
Well, you
res-
could do both. Zen was never meant to just be on the cushion. It's meant to be brought into your work, into gardening, into walking, into sleeping, into your relationships. Your Zen practice is something that's supposed to be, you're supposed to train yourself so it's present with you at all times. And
But what do
so
you- what
when
do you
you're
s-
doing the work and when you're sitting, you're practicing.
What do you say to the people who say they don't have time and they're so stressed out that they're just running from pillar to post?
Well, then it sounds like they need it the most, you know. You know.
That even rhymed.
Yeah.
Pillar to
That
post.
they need it. They need it the most. I think that if you're able to have the smallest, even 15 minutes of dedicated practice in the mornings and evenings,
Mhm.
then as you're running from post to post, you can train yourself to remain present and bring that practice with you as you're in activity.
Anything else you'd like to mention?
Oh, I think that's it. Oh.
Okay, good. Well, let's just see if we have any questions.
I'm curious who you were reading that led you to your interest in the philosophy of hermeneutics.
My thesis was on Heidegger and Hans-Jörg Gadamer, so German philosophers. I recommend them.
What was the thrust of your thesis? What were you trying to show?
I was trying to show that in creating a sense of greater understanding between two people, it's not that we have to put myself in your shoes because that's impossible. There's no way for me to get outside of my own biases. Instead, I should become aware of my own biases and my own worldview, become aware of your worldview so that we can create a greater overlap between them and find a common shared understanding and increase our own capacity for meaning and understanding the world through each other.
And what's the technical transaction through which you bring that about? Is there some sort of dialogue?
Interpersonal communication, yeah, dialogue.
But I mean, how would you structure that? Would you interview the person? Would you?
In my thesis, which was as many years ago, there was like a step-by-step plan of starting with what you held in common and then really bringing out and making explicit what your differences were. So for you and I, it would be generational differences and how my generation influenced my worldview in a way that's different than yours, and then trying to build bridges between them.
So that sounds familiar. That sounds like getting beyond no, something like that. Getting to yes, getting beyond no, that kind of thing, and negotiation. So, any further question? Anything online there? Anything from you? Nope. Okay. Well, before we close, then we have a few more minutes left. I'd like you to just sum it up for us, what you have been saying. ABC is where you came from, right? Here's where Zen happened, and here's where you're going.
Okay. I'll try.
How old were you when you first got into?
When I first got into Zen, I was 23. I was 23, so it's about 5 years ago. And for me, and I hadn't phrased it this way before, but it was all about escaping the prison that was my conceptual mind, and the inability to reach truth through that or inside that prison. And so finding Zen was a way for me to let go of control, let go of a need to be right, let go of a need to put everything in language, and instead just seek things with my whole being and become comfortable with that, become comfortable with uncertainty. And I've done a lot of intensive training. I've done a lot of lay practice. I'd like to bring them together a little bit more. And in terms of where I'm going, like I was saying, I think that we are all in store for some really, really challenging times. And I think Zen practice provides a way to process what's happening and become comfortable with the uncertainty and become more rooted in our principles and integrity, and have that be the filter through which we do everything.
So do you see the hermitage practice experience that you're going into as kind of a pause in the process?
Not so much a pause, but a deepening. I can only go so deep in my practice when I'm in 7 different places a day and interacting with hundreds of people a month. And I think that being able to isolate and really go deep in my own practice and my own relationship to being that I am stronger and less vulnerable when I come back and I
Mhm.
continue to organize and I continue to do social justice work.
And how long do you think it's going to last?
I'm not sure. I'm leaving that open for myself
So
and
it's
for
open.
it to unfold.
And lastly, what would you say to a young person such as yourself or younger than yourself who maybe, again, doesn't have much exposure to
Mm.
Zen? How would you sort of coach them about approaching this? We say Zen is for everybody, but not everybody's ready for Zen.
Yeah.
It's not a crusade. We're not
Mhm.
trying to push Zen onto people, but what would you, coming from your experience, say to young people like yourself who may be looking around? Everybody's facing the same kind of,
Yeah.
anybody who's thinking or who's aware or awake is facing the same kind of crisis where
Mhm.
we all see the big wave coming at us.
Mm.
What would you say to them in terms of any recommendations about
Yeah.
Zen or anything like that?
I think it'd be twofold. The first would be to open yourself up to yourself in a way that's compassionate. I think when we start to see ourselves on our own negative mental habits, we can be really hard on ourselves and it can become really overwhelming. And to but that process is absolutely essential because we can't help others without seeing our own negative habits.
Mhm.
And so as that process starts to unfold and you start to become more aware of yourself, to be compassionate with those things that show themselves to you. And then the second thing would be to find community. I think that it's impossible to change yourself or change the way you relate to the world without a supportive community to help you through it. And so finding those people and building trust over time
Yep.
is
Yep.
important.
Genuine community is difficult to find these days.
It is.
We think of ours as a collaborative
Mm.
community as well. Well, thank you, Sophia Gallagher, and we wish you the best in your further adventures.
Thank you.
And we hope
for
you stay in
having me.
touch
Yeah,
and let
thank
us
you.
know how it's going out there, and that you come back and visit
Yeah.
from time to time.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for holding this space here.
Sure. We will miss you.
I'll miss you guys too. Yeah. Are we done?